All right, thank you guys very much for joining us. My name is David Elser. I'm the Executive Director of the Keramida Foundation for Sustainable Living. This was the Business Development Manager for Keramida Inc., a nonprofit and for-profit consultancy located about a mile from here. Thank you all very much for coming to our fair city of Indianapolis. You all traveled long and far to be here. And congratulations maybe to our youngest member, the ECC. We're grateful to have their presence. Just wanted to kick off today. We're going to be talking about financing the clean energy revolution. I've got a couple of awesome folks here. We're really excited to get this party started. So I will go ahead and let them introduce themselves, and we'll hop right into some breaking news before we get into this conversation.
Good mid-morning. Good late morning. My name is Amandla Anderson. I'm the Executive Director for IFF. We are a community development finance institution, or a CDFI, that is headquartered in Chicago. However, I lead our Indiana and Kentucky markets. IFF as a CDFI provides capital to nonprofits and mission-serving organizations to do real estate projects. We also have a very strong real estate consultancy that walks alongside nonprofit leaders as they make critical decisions about everything real estate, from concept to ribbon cutting. And our wonderful director, Donna Sink, is here also, who leads that consultancy team. And then we do a lot of research and we have a social impact accelerator that really is trying to be a thought leader and partner with communities across the Midwest. That's our footprint of organizations that we serve, to make sure that folks understand and that we understand how capital can spur growth in communities and walk alongside them to make those things happen.
So, I'm Alex Riley. I'm with the Indiana Energy Independence Fund. So the Indiana Energy Independence Fund is a new nonprofit green bank, which has just recently been set up in Indiana. For those of you who are not from Indiana and you are from a different state, you probably have your own version of the Indiana Energy Independence Fund with a different name in your state. And in fact, it's really interesting that the world of CDFI and Green Bank, that we're together on this panel, because I think sometimes people confuse it, and we'll get into how each type of entity looks at the world and what it's really focused on. Short of it is the green banks are focused on specifically financing the clean energy transition. So that's kind of one of the core missions that we have, and the other is to do so for populations who are currently not being served by the capital markets appropriately or at all, so that people who are being left behind in the clean energy transition have an opportunity to catch up. So we'll get into the details.
Very good, thank you. So if we could just explain our organizations a little bit, and maybe talk about how you got involved, how you found your way here to this conference, and why you think it is important that we need to be looking kind of externally at financing and underwriting our clean energy.
I'm here for it. So, to be personally honest, as a little bit of personal background, I went to IU, received a SPIA degree. It's now O'Neill School. Big SPIA, always in my heart. Recognizing O'Neill put a lot of money on that to put his name on there. So it is an O'Neill degree now. But during my studies, I really wanted to get into environmental, government, and nonprofit management. Those things were always core to me. And so when I came out of school, I started working in community development corporations, because that was the ground level of slightly grassroots, but much more focused on how do you touch individuals who need supports, those communities that aren't always able to get capital to do the things they want to do, and how do I be a catalyst in that work? So when I joined IFF, it was a natural fit. I told my CEO the other day that if I stop loving what I do, he should be worried, because if I don't feel energy come from the work, I've been really excited over the last 4 years because IFF opened up the door for us to really think strategically about how we help nonprofits look at their efficiency in buildings. Oftentimes, we get so caught up in kilowatts and the very technical terms that most leaders who are making sure kids are getting backpacks on their backs, families are being fed, they don't technically resonate with that language. And so what we really pride ourselves in, and what Donna has been doing with us, has been really focusing in on you as a nonprofit are likely going to get an old building. Someone is going to donate to a building for $1 that you're going to have to retrofit. And how do you do that in a way that's efficient for your organization, but also makes you a good steward for the resources that come into the door? And so what we've done on one side is really work alongside nonprofits to help them understand the capacity of their structures, how they can improve those efficiencies, and put together kind of a cost estimation of, if you do this, here's how what your impact will look like. On the other side of that, about 15 years ago, Bank of America gave us a small grant to work specifically with some nonprofits in Chicago to focus on their energy efficiency. They gave resources for dollars for technical assistance to evaluate structures, and then matching dollars to make those improvements for those organizations. I think oftentimes we think nonprofits cannot take on debt. But if you think about it, some are actually using their credit cards at 24 to 29%, which is ridiculous. And so getting a loan from IFF or another CDFI really helps them to be able to leverage the resources that they have in hand right now, spread those payments out over time, and not have a prepayment penalty. And so we're really excited to be in the space of being a trusted advisor with nonprofit organizations across the Midwest to help them strategically think about how to utilize their space and then help bring capital to that so that then they feel comfortable making those types of decisions.
How we got here and what we do, right? My background's a little weird. I joined the Indiana Energy Independence Fund. Driving that name in your head. I joined it in August of last year, so I've been at it for about 6 or 7 months, I guess, whatever it is. For the previous 7 years before that, I was in city government, Bloomington, Indiana, which is a college town south of Indianapolis, and I was the director of economic and sustainable development, which was a really interesting, progressive way to set up a department, because it combined economic development, sustainability, and arts and culture all in one department, which is a little bit atypical. Sometimes they're split up into different things. Sometimes sustainability is under public works. People are kind of spread all over the place. The reason I tell you that is because actually the work that we're doing right now at the Indiana Energy Independence Fund, repeat after me, is a lot like that kind of work where you're combining different types of parts of missions into one more holistic way of looking. Before I was at the city of Bloomington, I started my career in New York. I went to school in New York, and I was in advertising. So if you know Mad Men, it wasn't exactly that, but it was crazy. And then I went into telecommunications and actually moved to the Midwest as a result of a job in the telecommunications industry. So kind of a weird background. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about the Indiana Energy Independence Fund. So a green bank, basically, the secret sauce of a green bank, I think if you boil it down, is that it brings in capital from a variety of different sources, and we'll talk about one of those sources in a bit here, the federal government. But it brings in capital, philanthropic capital, local government capital, federal, state, private. And then it uses that to kind of multiply the effect of the capital. So it leverages that capital that it gets as an organization. And it does so in a variety of different ways. One is, for example, backing loans that private capital providers are interested in and potentially interested and willing to make if they have some air cover, right? So credit unions are great examples. CDFIs are great examples. CDFIs tend to be a little bit more aggressive in their mission than maybe credit unions. Credit unions are a little bit closer to more traditional banking. but they also are mission oriented. But, you know, a credit union might, for whatever reason, either not want to get involved in clean energy loans at all, or if they do, you know, the rule set that they use might be a little bit unforgiving relative to, you know, the individual's income, FICO score, that sort of thing. So they may perceive, and it's important to understand that it's perceived risk, not necessarily actual risk, but they may perceive that there is a risk to lending capital in, you know, an unsecured loan to a household to, you know, put a heat pump in or put solar on the roof if that household doesn't meet pretty strict criteria. So back to what the role of the green bank is, we go in and we say to the credit union, look, if you are able to be more forgiving in terms of your who you can serve. There are people being left behind in your community. They don't have a lot of assets. They don't have a lot of income. As a result, and frankly, they're the ones most susceptible to the negative impacts of, you know, this dirty energy world. So if there are people out there that Green Bank wants you to reach, how do we structure it so that you can go and reach those populations, businesses, individuals, you know, nonprofits, anybody? How can we use our capital to incentivize you, credit union, for example, to create a product or to extend a product that you have to this underserved population? Okay. So we are not, the key takeaways are, number one, we're not granting money out to anyone. Number two, we're not even loaning our own capital directly. Sometimes the green banks do that, but really the power of the capital and the structure of how green banks typically work is to create some leverage and use that to multiply out the impact that you can have through these third-party lenders. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that, you know, if Shannon wants to put solar panels on her house, then there is no expectation that the end user will know about the green bank. We're here. We'll tell people. It's not like we're trying to be secret about this, but the reality is we're depending on others to get the word out about the financing that we are bringing into a market. A key constituency in that, obviously the lenders, but another one is the contracting community. So installers and contractors. So a green bank typically will build up a trade ally network of contractors, and that network, because really in the end, if you're sitting at your kitchen table and you want to put, you know, you're going to do some work like replace your boiler or whatever it is that you want to do, the first person you're going to call is a contractor to come in and tell you what your options are, right? Not only in terms of what the technology options are, but also what the financing options are. So it's incumbent upon green banks to make sure that the trade allies are trained up, equipped to be able to talk about, you know, the financing that's available. And that becomes another key constituency in the kind of marketplace as we go to law. So that's out there.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you very much. Yeah, I actually came from the nonprofit fundraising world, so I see this as a philanthropy. As we look through so many of these kind of federal funding options, they all require independent capital, independent fundraising. And even I know so many of us work kind of microscopically at the city planning level, at the grassroots organization level. You know, looking internally at local philanthropists. You know, we had a great presentation earlier by some folks funded by the McKinney organization, which does you know, tons of great philanthropy locally. But you know, as we look into this kind of mesh of private capital, public capital, and then local drawn initiatives, I think that you know, that kind of drives so much of what we do, and that's why I'm really excited to have you know, both of these great folks here on the panel. But I will cut my bio short because I think we've got some hot breaking news here. This morning, as of about an hour and 20 minutes ago, they did just announce the $20 billion greenhouse gas grant fund paying out to 9 different organizations. So we are really, really excited to see that pay off. I'm sure some of you may be in that scene already, but I'd like to get some kind of initial remarks. I know We are all kind of involved in that process. And maybe we'll start here and get your kind of initial take on it.
It's still really new for us, but we're really excited. On IFF, we participated in several of the applications, and so we're still working out kind of what specifically that'll look like, but or how that will roll out. But it really can this program really aligned well with our core mission to begin with, and deploying this capital to nonprofit organizations and mission organizations who may not typically have their first round of thinking is that I'm going to build a building that's efficient as much as though I need a new building because I got to serve more kids. I think that overall, we're really excited about the announcement and are looking to be, help to be part of the catalyst of deploying this huge amount of resources back out to the community.
So I thought I wanted to just remind everybody what was in the greenhouse gas reduction fund, just in case it's not top of mind, and then explain what happened today as opposed to what's going to happen in July, and then also talk about some of the other acronyms a little bit. Fundamentally, I mean, before I do that, this is generational funding, right? I mean, it is like once in a century kind of funding. We should all understand it that way. We should also be very thankful to the administration, the EPA, for really having done this, because it's gonna have a significant change or impact in terms of changing the lives of the people that we are all here to serve. The greenhouse. So the Inflation Reduction Act has a bunch of stuff in it, and I'm not going to try to go through it all. But in the Inflation Reduction Act, there is something called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which was one component of it. And in that, there were 3 different buckets. Okay, so IRA is like the mothership. Then the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is a funding component of that. There are others in the IRA. And then the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund has 3 different buckets. Okay, the first 2 buckets that I'm going to describe are the ones that were announced today. The third one has yet to be announced. Okay, so the first one is what's called the National Clean Investment Fund. I'm not going to use acronyms. Okay, great. That is $14 billion, which it's hard to wrap your brain around that, but just keep that in mind. The second one is the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. That was for a total of 6. So 14 for the national and 6 billion we're talking about for the clean community investments. Broadly, the third one, before I get into the specifics of the first 2, the third one is what's called Solar for All. You might know that term. It's actually, if you're from Indiana, you might get confused by that term because it's both a local program, a statewide program. It's now a national program, and it's all very confusing. But there is the third bucket in the Inflation Reduction Act, Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, is Solar for All. That I think will be told, or I'm guessing sometime in the summer when that's announced. It's a little bit more complicated. So in the case of the first one, the National Clean Investment Fund, versus the second, let me just describe them relative to each other. In the case of the first one, it's really kind of like setting up a centralized, almost like national green bank, right? A national scale of the activity that all of our different communities, players, community, investment entities are doing on the ground. This is going to be doing it kind of at the national level. So big, and the kinds of projects that they might do would be, if Target wants to put solar on all of its stores, right? It would be unmanageable for Target then to have to deal with every state version of a funding source to be able to do that. This is kind of an example of a national play. Another one might be, it's just a scale that's so beyond the resources that might be available locally that it has to be done with a much more substantial investment. So that's the kind of stuff that happens out of that one. In contrast, the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator is not meant to be making direct investments into projects on the whole. What it's really meant to do is to take the funding and push that funding out to lenders in the community, whether it's CDFIs or green banks or whomever, community lenders on the ground. So ultimately, the balance sheet of those lenders is increased because that money is sent down to them. And those lenders, and then there's, by the way, also technical assistance money. So it's not just financial money to lend, but it's also technical assistance money. That money then becomes administered and kind of dealt with at the local level. So that's kind of the key thing to understand about both of those. Solar for All is kind of a completely different animal. It's weird that it's under the same one, but it's basically that is all about low income residential solar, right? So we'll learn more about that in the months ahead, but that's essentially what's been announced. So you know, in the case of the first two competitions that I described, a very small handful of players will be the administrators of that funding. And then, you know, the most funding came out of the National Clean Investment Fund, went to a group called Coalition for Green Capital, which is sort of a industry group for green banks, but they're also morphing into their own kind of national green bank structure. So that was like 5 billion. But anyway, this money is then being allocated out as of this morning, announced. So everybody's freaking out this morning, but this is either, as I was saying to Heather, this is either the best timed conference ever in terms of, or the worst timed conference, but I think more likely the better one, because this is really breaking news. And as I said right at the beginning, this is generational. Remember this day.
Well, I think the most impressive part about all this is that the funds all require a 7-to-1 private capital to public money match. So really, this $20 billion is going to be over 150 billion by the time it's all said and done. And so I know a lot of us may work with external funding organizations, private philanthropy, local and state funds to supplement that. But I think it'll be a really interesting opportunity for all of us who are involved in either the fundraising scene or the grant writing scene. This is going to be a huge opportunity for us to kind of step up and move this money even 7 times further than the initial dollar. So on that note, I'm curious how you might you or your organization might try to supplement some of that money, how you might assist some of these beneficiaries, and how your organization uses your private money to supplement and work towards kind of federal funded program.
So IFF as a CDFI, what we do, and I guess a good understanding of CDFIs as well would be helpful. We receive capital from the Treasury annually or through a process. This was developed about 40 years ago to make sure that capital was going to nonprofit organizations or to low and moderate income communities. What happened from that, and why IFF is a little bit different than some other CDFIs, is there are some CDFIs that just focus on affordable housing. Here in Indianapolis, the Indianapolis Neighborhood Housing Partnership is a CDFI, and they focus on making sure that individuals who get mortgage assistance or mortgage education before buying a home, and then help them to get a mortgage. That's a certain type of CDFI. There's also LISC is a CDFI. Most LISC are, I think, in most Midwestern markets. They focus more on small businesses and community development lending. So that's their kind of lane. IFF, our lane is kind of nonprofits and mission oriented. When I say mission oriented, I mean schools, childcare, federally qualified health clinics, anyone bringing food capacity to a community, because if you've ever tried to run a grocery or know enough, the margin in grocery stores is so small that's why most of the time your little bodegas don't work anymore in the neighborhood. And so we provide capital for those, and then affordable housing. So there may be for-profit individuals that are in those spheres, but we support them because they're mission oriented and they're part of the ecosystem that makes up the community. So we get a lot of our resources from CRA funding from banks who have an obligation through that additional legislation that happened 40-something years ago. There are some changes that are happening to it as well now that banks are pushing back on, but we consistently get millions of dollars through that fund. We also have impact capital that comes in. So McKinsey Scott gave us a nice donation. Starbucks has given us donation. Other organizations who believe that this work and bringing capital to low to moderate income communities is really important. When you're making a donation through impact investing, you're not necessarily looking for a return. Most of our capital that comes in that is looking for a return is around 1 to 2%. And then the last kind of pool is foundational organizations. We actually have a lot of like Catholic nuns that have invested in. That was one of our kind of first group of folks that invested. They have all this real estate and resources. And so they actually were the initial funders into IFF in our impact investing. But but also community foundations who are looking to make more impact investing, who don't necessarily have the infrastructure to do loans, but are willing to pull resources from their corpus versus a grant to make sure capital gets out to community organizations. I feel like I've gone down a path that I don't remember.
Well, let's I mean, you talk about, these organizations that are mission driven. What else constitutes a great application when they come to you and they ask for money?
I mean, at the end of the day, IFF wants to support their goals and their mission. And so great applications to us are folks who've been really thoughtful about how they want to implement their programming and community and are open to suggestions and support to make that happen. The hardest thing for our real estate consultants is telling someone no. And they're all actually lead with their heart. The 4 people who are in my office right now, I'm often pushing them to say, no, just tell them no, it doesn't work. And I think that actually is better for organizations to hear that, because we don't just say no, we say, but here's how you can do it. Here are the steps you need to take. A great example for us is that we had a nonprofit organization, an arts org group that was in an old Masonic lodge in kind of central Indiana. Won't name it because then you might know who it is. But they had this Masonic lodge that they had purchased. Their organization, they received it from a foundation, and they're now offering all these programming, arts classes for kids, weddings, all these things. And they were like, this is not working. We need a financial feasibility analysis to understand how we make this model of operating a building that we got for free work. And as we started to peel through their financials, we recognized that they actually had a couple of solar panels on their building, and we unpacked it again. And they are paying a ridiculous amount back to, I mean, it's almost scary when we looked at it, like they're in debt to this solar company because there was no one really there to lead them through the process of adding panels to their facility in a way that actually truly worked. And I don't personally still understand it. I don't think Ghana does either. We've tried to figure it out to see where the arrangement went wrong. But I think in what's really critical to us when we talk about application readiness and the appropriate group, we really need to make sure we have technical systems in place. So when nonprofit organizations are making these types of decisions, because there are vendors out here everywhere that are trying to sell folks on things that they've learned, they're marketers. They understand how to play those buzzwords with them. But if they don't have anyone to really guide them through the process and understand the long-term sustainability of that, I think that's really where all of us can lean in more closely with. And so I'd say a good application is being informed on what are the possibilities for their group.
I'll turn that over to you too, Alex. What makes a great application? What makes a great financier to you? And I'd really love for you to touch on, you talked about perceived risk versus actual risk. How does the perception of risk in your, I guess, prospective client base, how does that play into your interaction with them?
A lot in that question. So let me start with the application. So, again, I think we, as a green bank, we don't want to displace banks, or we don't want to displace other lending institutions that are doing a fine job with certain constituency that they serve, right? I mean, if that's working, let it go, right? That's great. We are about gap filling, and gap filling is different than taking the place of something else that's working. So a great application. So let me just start by saying we are across the entire continuum of sectors. So we work at the single family level, family home, multifamily residential, so on all forms of residential, small and mid-sized businesses, large and industrial businesses, nonprofits, K-12, higher ed. So it's the whole thing, the whole gamut. And interestingly, it's not just energy efficiency and renewable energy, although those are probably key. It also includes alternative fuel vehicles, and also includes EV infrastructure. So that's kind of like if you think of who do we serve and what do we serve them for? That's how I would define the work that we're doing. There is a risk. So I think it's important. You were asking about perceived risk, right? Let's call it what it is. The current financial market, the current banking world and financial world is operating on, at best, outdated rules in terms of evaluating potential customers. At worst, intentionally structured to exclude people, right? So and that's for a whole other panel. But the important thing is it's not really working, and it's not working for kind of wonky reasons, right? Like if a FICO score is important, if like a certain amount of income is important, that may have absolutely nothing with someone's ability to repay a loan for clean energy, especially if they're getting energy efficiency out of it, no matter what that is. So when we do things like loan loss reserves, we're parking money behind a financing program coming from a lender like a credit union to take the loss. But it's actually sometimes there are losses, but it's not as significant as it is perceived to be, which is what's preventing them from doing it in the first place. Okay, so that's kind of I think the broader risk for all of us, and certainly from a green bank perspective, is the natural tension between wanting to get as much done as you possibly can, and in a marketplace where, especially in Indiana, we're kind of far behind, right? So there's a lot of pent up need to really get the transition moving. So that's about volume and scale and as many people as you possibly can do. There's a natural tension between that, which is a legitimate objective, to a sort of higher quality investment. So an investment which might be smaller. So maybe we're not doing 1 million homes, maybe we're doing 300,000 homes, but those 300,000 are better aligned with the mission of serving underserved populations than the million. You can get to 1 million, and you can get deal velocity very quickly if you're not, because money moves more easily to the higher FICO scores and the higher income, right? There's less friction there, so more money will go out that way. It's harder to find and harder to implement a program that is much more disciplined on the core mission. So I think that's kind of a weird risk that we as a green bank and a lot of green banks grapple with, and we just have to be careful so that we are. Because, and the last thing I'll say is the federal, I think it may be a future question, but the federal dollars are being pumped out. But as we know, there's the possibility of an election going a different way later on this year. And so, there's a risk that some of this money, like that's happened with previous, funding, that could get clawed back. So there's also an urgency to try to get this money out into the market as quickly as possible.
Great, thanks. We'll keep it on federal dollars. So I'm curious, what do you see federally coming up probably before November? And what are you excited about? What are some projects that you're looking at federally financed, and maybe what are some grant opportunities might be you looking into?
There's a couple of things that every community grapples with that I think oftentimes we have to ask everyone to take a timeout on. One is I often hear new tax credits brought up in every single project. then we talk to nonprofit organizations. And I think educating our system as to what the true value of new markets are really is critical to communities that want to make big improvements to their neighborhoods, but maybe don't understand all that's included in a new market tax credit. I mean, you have to have you're going to pay $1 million in legal fees, like alone in a new market tax credit project. And so as exciting as it is to see, you know, allocations that are going to continue to come down the pipeline for our CDEs, community development entities, I think that it's really also a moment where we all should take a pause and make sure that we're helping folks understand what capital is available in our market and how to actually slice and dice it differently and think about it differently. I think that IFF, for example, we have never required an appraisal on property because we know that for an organization who has an nonprofit who's in the middle of a neighborhood, it's likely not going to get appraised at the value of what the loan is for and what the, you know, improvements are going to be to that site. And so we do not require an appraisal. It used to be up to $3 million. Last year, we took it off the table altogether. I think that's really important. The other piece is that we're willing and have the ability to subordinate. We don't have to be in first position because quite honestly, we've done a lot of the work ahead of time with these partners in hand. And I think that's if there's anything like a core value that I want us all to take out of it is that we're going to have to put core into organizations and individuals who have a good heart and want to do this work to help them understand the tools that are available to do it. And so to me, you know, I think of the daycare center in Chicago that we worked with who got an energy, they got a clean energy grant from the Illinois Clean Energy Foundation, right? Like that's also a city that is much more forward thinking than Indiana as a whole in a lot of ways. But creating those types of access points for organizations who may not be is often quick to think about, oh, I need another hand sanitizer station because this is in the moment, we need more hand sanitizers, versus let's talk really about your long-term sustainability and what does that look like. In Indiana, I will say it's hard to have a conversation with most nonprofit boards about climate. If you talk about climate change with most nonprofits, they get very like, ooh, I can't touch that. I'm going to have some backlash, you know, from my congressperson or state legislature. And so we really try to think about our language that we use when talking about energy efficiency and clean energy. Because at the end of the day, we want nonprofits to have more efficiency in the work that they do so they can continue to serve families in our community. So I guess that's what I would say. What comes to mind right now for me is new market tax credits. ARPA was another one that a lot of us fumbled on. Incredibly, I honestly don't even know what we've done with ours. Personally, I wish I had a list of what those things were in our state or even in our city. But I think that just, you know, when we think about massive amount of resources that come to our communities, it's really upon all of us to make sure we're engaged and involved in the process so that we can be better informed and help inform others who may not have access to the critical information that we do.
Very good. I'll put the same question to you and also kind of what notes of optimism do you have regarding some of this federal funding processes? This good news aside, maybe.
So let me start with we talked about the greenhouse gas reduction fund. That's, you know, that is what it is. There's a ton of other, and honestly, I lose my mind over all these. I'm sure everybody else is doing the same. It's just impossible to keep straight. Some are going to the state, some are going directly to, some are coming from the, you know, who knows. But what I would like to say, and it's particularly relevant, I think, because of the work that IFF, which is a great CDFI, does on nonprofits, is the direct pay component of the Inflation Reduction Act. That is, unlike some of these funding pots that are finite, right? They are 20 billion. That is an IRS thing that was embedded into the Inflation Reduction Act. Basically what it is, I mean, it's for those of you maybe familiar with it, it used to be that if I were an entity and I put, you know, $100,000 of something, a qualifying project on my roof, let's say solar, 30 30% of that I could get back as a tax credit. So my tax bill, would go out, it would be deducted by 30%. So the 300,000, or 30,000 of that example. So, but if you think about it, it required you to have a tax liability in order to be able to get that benefit. So the great thing about this is that it for those organizations like nonprofits, cities, other entities, they can have a rather substantial portion of a project, a qualifying project, even if they don't have a tax liability, they can get the value of that back. And the way that it works is they get it back as actually a cash reimbursement, as opposed to a deduction off the tax liability. So if you have this $100,000 project, you're putting $100,000 of solar on your roof, you're a nonprofit, and you submit for this. I mean, it's a little complicated, but you submit for it. Then after a certain period of time, that comes back to you as $30,000 in cash. Okay, so that's really exciting because that closed a huge gap and really was putting nonprofit people without tax liabilities at a huge disadvantage relative to the value of that. There's still some problems with it, and that's where I think CDFIs can come in. That's where green banks can come in. We should probably talk at some point about like how the partnerships can work. But if you think about it in your project, you need to actually complete your project. It needs to be operational. It needs to be submitted, and then ultimately the IRS gives you your money back for a portion of it, right? So not everybody, especially nonprofits, has that cash just sitting around they can use to invest in the project, waiting for that reimbursement to come down the road. Institutions like ours will be creating bridge loan products where that gap between the time that you have to pay the vendor to get your project done and the time that you ultimately get the direct pay cash reimbursement, there's a bridge there, a bridging opportunity between those two dates. And so that is a great opportunity to create very low interest rate financing for someone and because frankly it's very low risk, assuming they've submitted it correctly, there's very little risk at that. So anyway, I would say that's probably one of the most exciting things, even though there's tons of billions of dollars, that for me it's great. It's really unbelievable.
We have 11 minutes left in our fair session here. Do you any closing thoughts before we go to the questions?
No, I would just encourage, again, I think I said it at the end of what I said a moment ago, is that, we are all here for a reason. Like no one traveled just to Indianapolis on a 33-degree day to hang out. Unfortunately, when you leave this conference, I mean, my call of action to you would be to share something with someone who you may have not thought needed to hear that information. We preach to the choir quite often, that, we're all shaking our heads together. I get it. I'm understanding you. But sometimes we need to tell the person who doesn't quite know or doesn't quite get it yet, so that we can start to build up those ambassadors to the work. So that would.
I think my last thought would be that, building on that to some degree, which is that there are so many different organizations out there. And what's been really great in the handful of months that I've been doing this is how willing people are to both engage, learn, pass me along to someone else, help me get the word out, help people out there who may need something, get connected back to me. I think this is going to be a partnership game. And sometimes like people get a little protective of their networks and that sort of thing, but don't be protected, right? And don't be shy about asking, hey, can you connect me with the person at the whatever that I'm not getting a direct cold call response from? And, I think we all have to play this as a team sport. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity, definitely a lot of opportunity coming. Shame on us if we are trying to each do this as a kind of little island organization. We really have to be thinking about it as a total package.
Great. Question, Bill?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate it. Learned a lot. I too am excited about the select pay opportunity. Do you have any evidence yet about the penetration of that? How many people are excited about it and applying for it or going through the steps to get select pay? Do we have any evidence yet that that's working at the community level?
Yeah, so it's not totally, the information I'm about to share with you was from a call, actually, some of you may have been on yesterday, it was a webinar about direct pay. They said during that, so it's a two-step process. You have to kind of pre-register your project, right? Front end, and then you submit your tax filing, right? Even if you don't have a liability, you submit it, and that's how you get the money back. I think the White House published information that said that there were that 1,000 entities had submitted as of January. So this is already old news, but as of January, 1,000 entities had submitted for direct pay. That first step, that pre-registration step. So that's probably ballooned significantly because it was really it's been aired out. So I think there's a lot of excitement around it. It's not as easy as just like, you write down on the back of a napkin and you send it over to the IRS. I mean, there's some pretty significant, stuff that you have to do with that. And I would advise you to find someone who can help you do it if you don't feel qualified to do it. But I think there is going to be a lot more uptake on it than even the thousands already have it. And I think it's a 10-year program. So we're really just kind of at the beginning of it. So there's unlike, this federal funding that's kind of like one and done, but it's kind of, once it's out, it's out. This is a program that's going to go on for a decade.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got a question about the technical assistance you offered through IFF. You can say a little bit more about that. In our experience, it's not just the nonprofits that need help, but sometimes there are vendors who aren't used to working with nonprofits and don't sort of appreciate cash flow issues for a nonprofit.
That is critical. Donna is shaking her head because she's worked with almost 50 nonprofit organizations across the state of Indiana, specifically to help them with their energy efficiency projects. I think that before I'll answer you directly, I'll say this in general, is that most organizations, nonprofits that have buildings aren't trying to be LEED Gold certified, right? They are actually just trying to make sure that the inside of their building is not leaking and that that the energy that's coming in is actually heating their building. And so part of our job on the technical assistance side is to help organizations understand what exactly the impact of you having leaky windows, you having, a non-Energy Star gas heater, water heater, or whatever it may be in your facility. And then also helping them to prioritize what's most important right now. Because there's a lot of life and safety things that I don't think we talk about, because again, we're just like, my heater went out, I can go call so-and-so foundation and they'll give me $30,000 to replace it. But if we're really trying to be a good trusted advisor, we're going to walk them alongside and say, actually, you shouldn't be having your paint can sitting next to this gas water heater at the back of your house. Which we have had those conversations, like literally with nonprofit organizations. To your question directly, I think that how we have done it is we put together kind of an energy efficiency report that helps to do like a facility assessment of their property, looks at their utility bills over the last 2 years, and then Donna has this really cool like heat gun thing.
Their camera. That's a, thermal imaging.
Yeah, and we'll go through and see, like we had this building once where we were looking at the image and it looked like something was like the devil was coming down actually to this doorway. But what it was is that all the insulation from the building had slid into like this shaft over the door. But so I guess my main point is, first, putting together the facility assessment. Second, understanding their energy costs. And then third, putting then together the cost priorities for those things. We then work with the contractors, because hopefully it's a general contractor and not, I'm going to use you for this and you for that and you for this, because I think that is also where nonprofit leaders are running organizations. They're not trying to, GC their own projects. And so Donna has done a good job of like being there one-on-one at the beginning of the contract and also inspecting it at the end to make sure that the things that were said to be done are included. We oftentimes do not ask for owner's representation during construction because we think that the contractor, the architect, and the owner all know what they're doing. And truth be told is that the architects have beautiful fluffy buildings that they want to create, but have no idea how to finance or do it. And contractors bring the reality to the table and all the change orders. And so having an owner's rep in there at that moment really helps someone to understand, here are the most important things that you should be worried about to make sure the projects stay on time. I think that answered your question slightly.
Yes.
Very good. We have time for one or two more questions.
So is there a network where I could find or my green bank in my state? I'm in Ohio.
In Ohio, yeah, oh, so Ohio's interesting. It's
That is Indiana.
That's Indiana, but for a legitimately, in this context reason, the state of Ohio, so Cleveland has a green bank. Columbus has a green bank. Cincinnati's thinking about standing one up. So in certain instances, you have city level things that are happening. It's sort of beyond, I think, city limits, but because the state, like in Indiana, wasn't kind of doing it. But I think that there's progress also at the state level, that there's kind of they wouldn't call themselves a green bank because they don't want to, they're trying to stay below the radar. But there are also state entities that are kind of effectively serving that. So you actually have in Ohio a interesting mix that we don't even have here. Originally, the Indiana Energy Independence Fund was thought of potentially as being something that would be done in Indianapolis. It was gonna be a city focused one. It was decided that it was actually gonna be better to do it statewide. But in other states, especially if you had a kind of hostile, state government, what ended up happening is they just decided to do it themselves. And so that's. And then the other thing, the broader answer for anybody not from Ohio is there's this group called, and you can Google it, it's the American Green Bank Consortium. It's a program called Coalition for Green Capital, which was, I mentioned earlier, is $5 billion national green bank. That's a place where you can find a listing of all the green banks. So if you just go in there and you can look around, that's probably your best bet.
Anybody else?
Can I just add too, I think that when we think about capital for projects, I'm gonna give you an analogy of thinking of it as lasagna. Like we all have to stack all different pieces of resources to make things work for projects. And I think that what's really important and critical right now is that all those stacks, the meat, the ricotta, the whatever, the sugar, I put a little sugar in mine, whatever that is that you put into your lasagna, you have to remember that all those pieces have to go together in some way. And so please be really open to terms that you may put in place for projects. We have a moment to interrogate the system and not do it the same way we've done it in the past. I mean, our no appraisal thing has been something we've done for a really long time. There are other ways that we can interrogate the system to make sure that we're not going to put things in place that make it unattainable, not reachable for folks who need it the most. And so I encourage you, as you're working with partners who are thinking about investing or creating capital solutions, to really think about how to interrupt the system because the same way of deploying the resources is not going to be what we've done in the past. And especially during this time frame that we have to do it in, or we don't have to do it in the time frame, but it's not as time constrained as it may seem right now. But I think what's most critical is being at the table with folks who are willing to partner and do partnerships or participatory loans or investing. You really have to start having those conversations now, because once it gets to the underwriters table, underwriters will underwrite what they know they can get approved at committee. And so you have to be able to move the mitigations, all those pieces, you're going to have to break those down before they get to committee table. Because if not, then they're going to continue to make we will continue to make those same type of decisions if we're not interrupting it now.
Good. Well, that's all the time we have. I want to thank both of you for joining me here today, and appreciate your time, and hopefully you all got a lot out of this. And we'll be around if you guys have any further questions.